The production of energy in West Virginia has caused the mining of a lot of coal, oil, and gas over the last 100 years or so, but not without controversy, and it's starting all over again. I'm Dan Ringer, and we'll talk about the Marcellus Shale gas right now on the Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
People are excited and worried about the production of Marcellus Shale gas. My guests are attorneys Andrew Graham and Kenneth Tawney. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invite, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Marcellus Shale gas, is that something we just invented?
Oh no, I mean, Marcellus Shale gas has been around, I suppose you could say, for millions of years. The shale is a rock formation that has existed under Appalachia. It's close to a mile deep, between 5,000 and 8,000 feet deep. Covers an area across basically all of West Virginia, west of the Appalachian Mountains, of the sort of the ridge down through Tucker and Randolph and Pocahontas counties. Also covers western Pennsylvania, western New York, eastern Ohio. It's been there for a long time.
Well, did we just discover it?
Well, actually, we've known that Marcellus Shale existed for a long time, Dan, and we knew that there was gas in it. But unfortunately, because of its character as a shale rock rather than a sandstone, it was not believed that it was productive until the last few years, when a couple of different things came together to make it commercially practicable to produce it, and those things were horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing.
You brought a couple of samples of stone with you. Show us what
I did. This is a core sample showing sandstone formation, and if you put this under a microscope, you would see that it has little holes between the sand, and it has what's called permeability and porosity that would allow gas molecules to travel through the stone. And if you drilled a hole into it, because it's under pressure, the gas would flow to that wellbore, to the lower pressure, and you could produce it.
As I hold this and feel it, it's a rock.
It is.
And we build buildings out of sandstone, and this feels very much like the sandstone buildings that we see built around, well, pretty much everywhere. But it also feels like the sand that you would get your hands into at a beach. If you hit this with a hammer and powdered it, it would feel just like that. Looks a little different, but basically the same stuff.
That's exactly what it would be.
So because just as we sit on a beach and you pour water, or you see the tide come in, soaks down into the water, that means it's permeable, that liquids and gases pass through it fairly readily.
Right.
That's
right.
it.
But
Yeah.
the other rock you have is shale.
Yeah, this is actually a piece of Marcellus Shale. It outcrops in upstate New York. I think, in fact, around the town of Marcellus, isn't it?
A town called Marcellus, just outside of Syracuse.
And the Drake Museum blessed me with a copy of the shale. And if you look at this and compare it to the sandstone, you will see that it is much more compact, and it doesn't have the little crevices and the porosity that the sandstone has.
Actually, it feels between the two as if I rubbed the sandstone with the Marcellus Shale, the sandstone would rub away a whole lot faster than the shale would. This is a much harder rock.
That's right.
And yet, even though it's a much harder rock, there are, it's always hard to imagine when you look at a rock, the idea that it's still full of little tiny fissures and little things that can hold gas.
Well, and I can see that the structure of it is along the edge is basically it's layered. It looks as though it's something piled on top of something on top of something.
And that's
on top
exactly
of
what it
something.
is.
Yeah, it was organic matter at one time, and that was compressed over 1 billion years into the structure that it now carries. But within those layers, as layer after layer got laid down, gas was trapped within the rock. And once you can drill into this rock and create the necessary fissures and a path for the gas to travel, if you will, then that gas can be produced.
And you mentioned the technological advances that allows it possible to get this gas out was hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. Tell us what hydraulic fracturing is.
Well, it might actually be easier to talk about the horizontal drilling first, because without the horizontal drilling, you wouldn't really have the ability to do the hydraulic fracturing. The idea here is that a traditional oil and gas well drilled in West Virginia would have been a vertical well, just as we all think of a well, just a hole from the surface down into this rock. And then, as Ken was explaining, the gas, because it's under pressure, would naturally flow to the low pressure of the well bore, and then either through natural pressure it could come to the surface, or through having a pump system, you could draw the gas up to the surface. Because of the low porosity and low permeability of the Marcellus Shale, if you were to drill a traditional vertical well into it, you're just not going to get much gas, because the gas is still trapped in the rock. So one of the advances is horizontal drilling. So you come down into the rock, and then you drill through the rock horizontally.
So you actually drill down and then turn and drill into the rock.
Yes. And so you're actually drilling then additional pathways out into the shale itself. Now, if the shale had high permeability and high porosity like the sandstone did, the gas would again naturally flow into the wellbore and come to the surface. But because it has low porosity and low permeability, you need to do something to get the gas moving out of the rock, and that's where the hydraulic fracturing comes in.
Yeah, and to put this in perspective, Dan, as Andy said earlier, these vertical wells are drilled 5,000 to 8,000 feet deep. So 5,280 feet being a mile. We're drilling over a mile vertically. They are then turning those wells and drilling them anywhere from 4,500 out to 8,000, 10,000 feet. I think the longest I've heard was 12,000 feet. So they're drilling through this formation horizontally up to 2.5 miles to put this all in perspective.
That's not unlike the way coal is mined. You dig a hole down to where the coal is, and then you dig out from there into the coal seams.
It's funny you mentioned that. There's an attorney in Steptoe and Johnson's office in Meadville, Pennsylvania, that often uses that as an analogy of saying that the horizontal drilling for the Marcellus is almost more like mining for gas than it is the sort of historical just drilling down a well and allowing the gas to rush to the wellbore.
Instead of letting the gas come to you, you go to the gas.
You go to the gas. Yes.
And so the hydraulic fracturing actually involves putting a device down into this horizontal wellbore and setting off charges. And it shoots a hole through the side of your well casing out into the rock formation. And then you pump sand and water and a mixture of chemicals. And the hydraulic fracturing fluid is 99.5% nothing other than water and sand. But you pump this underground at very high pressures, and it will go through the hole that you shot into the rock, and because it's under such high pressure, it will actually create fissures and cracks in this rock.
It expands the cracks that you get, and the sand in the solution.
Well, it actually creates the cracks.
Okay.
Yes.
And the sand keeps those cracks open.
The sand then keeps the cracks open so that the gas can flow through it. And so it's 99.5% water and sand is what you're pumping underground.
But you withdraw the water then from the well.
Mm-hmm.
Most of you have what you call produced water. Once you complete the well, you will have some amount of that water, not 100%, but most of the water will come back to the surface, and that's what they call produced water.
Okay. I know there are a lot of concerns about that water and a lot of discussion about how it should be handled, and that's really beyond the scope of this program this afternoon. We're more concerned about what the surface owners are involved in here and how these wells are actually produced. Sometimes you get back more water than you started with, don't you?
Not generally, I don't believe.
I don't think so.
So this is not into the water table where I'm going to
No,
get my laundry water or my drinking
in fact,
water?
Part of the drilling process, and I don't want to get too in depth to get us off on the wrong path, but part of the drilling process is to drill down to where the groundwater level is, which of course we're talking about a gas well that's a mile or more deep. Groundwater, of course, is nowhere near where the production of the gas is occurring. You drill down, find where the water table is, and that's cemented off. That's an early part of the drilling process.
So you line the hole.
Right. The hole is going to be lined with cement to keep the gas from entering into the water table that way.
When you drill the well, Dan, you have what's called casing, and you will have 3 layers of pipe with cement in between each of those layers and on the outside of the pipe down through the water table and even down through coal in coal producing regions. So your water table is going to be anywhere from 50 to 200 feet deep generally.
That's where the water we use comes from.
That's correct. So it's 50 to 200 feet deep. Coal, I think the deepest you'll find coal is around 3,000. The Marcellus Shale, again, is 5,000 to 8,000 feet.
We're talking about Marcellus Shale gas. My guests are attorneys Andrew Graham and Kenneth Tawney. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. So, from what I hear you saying, under normal circumstances, we wouldn't worry about contaminating the groundwater with anything that you're doing down in the Marcellus Shale.
No, we would not.
People disagree with that.
There has been some disagreement. It's an issue that's been studied, sort of a related issue, most recently studied by the Environmental Protection Agency in a study that started in the late 90s. A report came out in 2004 that looked at the use of the same technique, hydraulic fracturing, in the drilling of coal bed methane wells. And as Ken said, I mean, the deepest you're going to find coal is typically around 3,000 feet, much shallower than the Marcellus Shale, and yet the EPA at that point in time found no evidence that hydraulic fracturing was affecting groundwater. And the EPA has now started a new round of studies. They just have been having public comment periods across the country because the hydraulic fracturing technique is used not just in the Marcellus Shale but in other shale gas regions all across the country. And that will be an important study that the EPA will do over the next couple of years to look at is the use of that same technique, which they found to be safe in the coal bed methane horizons between the surface and 3,000 feet. Is there some other danger that we're not aware of that's out there in the Marcellus Shale?
Of course, this is currently being debated, but it is being studied.
But Dan, I was on a panel last week with a gentleman from the Office of Oil and Gas, and he confirmed then that there have been no confirmed cases of hydrofracturing causing any pollution to water wells. And I've also read that New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, Alabama, officials have said the same thing.
Right.
There are just no confirmed cases of hydrofracturing causing any problems with well water.
And Dan, maybe we should say also that, although we're talking about hydraulic fracturing as if it were a brand new technology, much like horizontal drilling, it really isn't a new technology. We're seeing it used really for the first time in the Appalachian Basin. But horizontal drilling was first introduced in the Texas oil fields back in the late 40s, and hydraulic fracturing's been used in oil and gas development all across the country for nearly as long. So even though obviously we anticipate that when a technology is used for the first time in an area where people aren't familiar with it, lots of questions will be asked. But this is not new ground for this technology.
I have heard it suggested that if someone is concerned when they're approached and told that there's going to be Marcellus Shale gas production from their property or involving their property in some manner, that perhaps they're well advised to have a water test run before that starts to kind of establish the benchmark for what their water is like today. Then if they have problems later on, you can have it tested again to see what the problems are. But then there is a causal relationship that has to be demonstrated too. Just because your water goes bad doesn't mean that I did it by riding past your property on my bicycle or setting off fireworks or producing
Right.
Marcellus Shale gas. There's still that connection that has to be made so far as the law is concerned. But at least it gives you some evidence of where you were when you started.
That's right, and in fact, Dan, the regulations and the statutes of West Virginia provide that when the gas operator sends out a notice, their application for a well permit, they tell the landowner that they can get a water test at the expense of the operator if they so choose, and they can give them a list of people or testing laboratories. So it protects the operator and the landowner to
Right.
do that in advance.
Right. The best dispute is no dispute whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, because the thing about methane, which, gas, is that it occurs even close to the surface.
Yes.
And I remember, if you remember, the first oil and gas wells were only 100 feet deep. And in 1771, George Washington surveyed the first oil and gas tract, what was then Western Virginia, at a place called Burning Springs. The reason it was Burning Springs was because you had naturally occurring methane. So it's very common for people to have methane gas in their well water, but it had nothing to do with a well that was drilled.
In fact, it was not uncommon in the old days, and I suppose it still happens occasionally now, to see a body of water from which gas is bubbling out of it.
Yes.
It just bubbles to the surface automatically, and it doesn't have to be high quality gas or anything. Sometimes it's just air, but it bubbles out. Let's talk about surface owners.
Okay.
I own a farm. I'm told that there are minerals under it, oil, gas, and somebody comes by and says there's Marcellus Shale gas down there, and they want to buy my rights to it. What do I need to be concerned about?
Well, I mean, I guess you would start with, I guess on the one hand, you can verify whether or not you actually own the minerals or not. That would require
How do you do that?
a title examination, an examination of the land records in the county that you live in. Just the same as when you go to buy a house, that a bank's going to want to have a title run to make sure that your ownership of the land where your house is clear. No one else has any other claims on it. That sort of thing. The same kind of examination can be done of the land records in terms of who's the owner of the oil and gas or the coal or any other sort of mineral estate.
That's considerably trickier than just
It
doing a
is.
surface title
It
examination.
is. I mean, and it would cover a much longer time period.
In West Virginia, typically, when you're borrowing money to buy real estate, typically a house, but it can include acreage also, and you need to borrow money to make that purchase, the bank will typically say we want a 60-year title search, and sometimes now just 50 years. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is all they really want is a search for the ownership of the surface. In most of the United States over the years, and in West Virginia dating back a little bit more than 100 years typically, ownership of the minerals and ownership of the surface were severed. That is, coal producers, oil and gas drillers would come by, and they don't want to buy all 100 or 1,000 acres of your farm. All they want is the stuff that's under it. And so your great-grandpa or the owner of the land at the time may very well have sold the coal, oil, and gas or some combination of those things, maybe even sandstone, limestone, and other things off. If you do a 50-year title search, you will not find out that in 1890 the coal, for example, was sold out from under the land. You have to go specifically look for that. So many people think they own the minerals. They don't.
That's absolutely true. A lot of people are surprised that they don't own the minerals, and so people should be aware that if you really want to know, you probably need to do, well, not probably, you do need to do a full title search of the property, probably taking it all the way back to the patent from Virginia.
That is when we got the land from
Right.
them.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess a shorter time period might be, that the first commercial drilling for oil and gas occurred in West Virginia around 1860. It would be unusual to find any kind of mineral severance much earlier than that, really even before the 1850s for coal, because before the coming of the railroad, there just wasn't much need for tremendous amounts of coal to be mined in West Virginia. It was mostly for either home heating use or for small industrial uses. But beginning in the 1850s, you begin to see the severance of minerals in West Virginia, and it's very active, as you were talking, in sort of the period between the Civil War and maybe about 1910. You see a lot of coal that's sold off in that period, and then people, maybe they still had the oil and gas, and then all the children moved away in the 30s and 40s, and they sold the surface to one of the neighbors, and they kept the minerals.
We're talking about Marcellus Shale gas. My guests are attorneys Andrew Graham and Kenneth Connie. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. And it's important to recognize that minerals were severed at different times in different places around the state.
Oh yes, we regularly deal with oil and gas leases that were signed in the 1800s that are still valid leases to this day. Because of the provisions of an oil and gas lease, it's usually for what they call a primary term of maybe 5 to 10 years or 3 years, and as long as thereafter as oil and gas is produced. And so gas has been produced continuously from those leases for 150 years.
These leases can be complex. And I suppose if we leave you with one thought is, if somebody presents a lease to you for your consideration, get help with that lease. The best source of help the three of us would recommend, because we're all attorneys, is to take it to a lawyer. But when I've reviewed these leases and I see various terms in them, as an attorney, I understand, I think, what most of them mean. But the biggest question, the first question I'm asked by somebody who wants a lease reviewed is usually, am I getting enough money for my interest in this? How's a person supposed to know if they're protected in the lease or if they're getting paid enough?
That really is sort of the $64,000 question, isn't it? I mean, the typical lease in West Virginia until probably 2003, 2004 would have had two kinds of money. It would have had a signing bonus, which would say, we're going to pay you $1 an acre, we being the oil and gas company. We'll pay you $1 an acre for the 100-acre farm, and we'll pay you that same $100 for the next 5 years. And then if we drill a well on your property, we will pay you 1/8, 12.5% of the money we make from selling the gas. That was and you'd be hard-pressed to find a lease that didn't have those two money terms in it. Because of the tremendous interest in the amount of gas that's in the Marcellus Shale, the economic incentive of lessees, of gas companies, to come in and secure an acreage position to drill into the Marcellus Shale, those economics were upset. And you began to have, and I'm sure anybody who's been to a church picnic or a county fair in West Virginia over the last 5 or 6 years has heard someone talking about their brother-in-law who got how many hundreds or thousands of dollars an acre to lease their land. The question is as they always say with land, it's always location, location, location. If you're in an area that has tremendous interest in acquiring leases and drilling wells, and you're sitting on top of it, you have the right to pick who's going to drill it. You can command, the top dollar. What that top dollar is, I don't know.
And Dan, there's a lot of, well, in economic terms, there's not much transparency in the market. for what any particular landowner is getting in terms of a signing bonus or delay rental, or even the amount of the royalty that they're able to negotiate. I mean, ultimately, all those things are perhaps negotiable to some extent. Location is very important in West Virginia. Even though the Marcellus Shale covers the whole state, it starts to thin out about Route 33. So what they call the sweet spot in West Virginia is going to be north of Route 33. You might be able to command a little bit more money if you're up there than you are in the lower part of the state, where it's not going to be perhaps as economic to try to produce from the Marcellus
We've got
Shale.
just a few seconds left. I don't want any wells drilled on my property, but some landman just came by and said they're going to be drilling. How can I protect myself in that case? I don't want the wells drilled there.
Well, I mean, if you don't want wells drilled on your surface parcel and you don't sign a lease with anybody, there won't be any wells drilled on your property.
Well, I want paid for my gas, of course.
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? There is then the possibility, and again, it's sort of a question of negotiation. Maybe you can reach a deal where your acreage would be added into a drilling unit, where even though the well is drilled on your neighbor's property, that the company understands that the gas is also coming from your land. They'll limit the use of the surface on your property, but you would be included in a percentage of the money that's made from that natural gas.
Maybe.
Maybe. There is the concept of the rule of capture in West Virginia.
You know, the unfortunate part of all this is we're out of time. So I'm going to extract a promise from you guys to come back sometime later, and we're going to talk about the rule of capture and how you can get locked out of all this or how you can participate. Ken Tawney, thank you very much. Andrew Graham, thank you very much. And no, you don't get to say anything else.
Dan, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you also for being with us on behalf of the Law Works. I'm Dan Ringer. Keep track of this. We're going to. Thank you for watching. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks program topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find a video of the program at the LawWorks website. You'll also find free video and podcasts of previous programs on YouTube and iTunes. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future program, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a free copy of this show for classroom use, send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.